Okay, welcome one and all to this month's installment of Cafe CSE. We're happy to be with you. My name is Chip Oscarson. I am the director of the Scandinavian Studies program here on campus. I'm joined up here on the stand with Matt Ancell, here on my left, who is an associate professor of interdisciplinary humanities in the Department of Comparative Arts and Letters, as well as Dennis Cutchins, who is likewise an associate professor, but in the Department of English. The two of them are the co-directors of the International Cinema program here on campus. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about European cinema, some of the great films from since 2010. We'd like to thank Center for the Study of Europe for sponsoring this event. This has been a great institution that has started. There's been a lot of great discussions. We're happy to be part of that discussion. We're thankful for Nick Mason for helping to coordinate this, as well as Nellie Ashby and Kelly Blazian in the Kennedy Center for their collaboration. So the format for today is that we are, and I think most of you are probably familiar with the way that this goes on, we are sitting at a cafe at some nondescript European corner having a conversation, at least that's the idea, with just a few of our most intimate friends. And a PowerPoint presentation. And a PowerPoint presentation. Well, as we were contemplating today's topic, which was great films since 2010, it seemed a little bit strange that you wouldn't have any visuals at all. And so we're going to have a few things for you to be, so you can kind of visualize what we're talking about if you haven't seen some of these films. We'll have a couple clips, but it's mainly about the conversation. And we're going to be conversing until about 35 past. Is that what we figured? And then we'll have time to make you part of that conversation as well. So we hope we can extend that. Now, on your seat, you'll see a couple things. One is a flyer, a yellow flyer for a program the Kennedy Center is promoting. And the other is a white ballot. And what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to fill this ballot out. If there's a particular European film that you think is a great film that we need to mention, write it down, and we're going to collect these in about 15 minutes or so. We'll tabulate the results, and then we will, at the end, reveal the Audience Choice Award for our film. Now, I hasten to say that in selecting these films and having the conversation, we tried to withhold talking too much about things, because then the conversation happens before we get here on stage. So it will be a little bit free-flowing the way it goes. But as well, we kind of balked at the idea of a top 10 list. These are not a top 10 list, right? I think is fair to say. These are films that we chose that were films that we thought were worth bringing attention to in some kind of way. But it really is kind of difficult to rank these sorts of things. So as the moderator, I'm going to throw out a few questions here, just kind of get things started, and then we'll move into some of the films. You've both been directors of international cinema for, Dennis for almost 3 years, Matt for the last year. And I say European cinema, you say what? What does European cinema even mean? Is this a category that we think in? Is it a useful category? Why even try to think about films in this kind of way at all? What do you think?
Well, I think in terms of international cinema, often that we track things according to the language that is the film is the dialogue of the film is in, which is not always doesn't always correspond to where the film is produced or where the film is filmed, and so already you run into all kinds of problems about like what is this film? Is this a Danish film? Is this an English film? Is this a French film filmed in English or vice versa or something like that? And so I think for the purposes of international cinema, we think in terms of language because a lot of our funding comes because of language curricular support. But personally, I kind of don't care. And the film's a film, and I'm not using it to learn a language typically, and so I'm watching it to watch it as a film, and so that seems to be irrelevant for me. I know it matters in terms of awards and funding internationally and for festivals and things like that, but it's more of a question than an answer, right? I mean, as far as like, is this in terms of the nationality of a film, right?
Well, I guess one way of thinking about it is, so there's problems with thinking about film in terms of these national categories for the reasons you've mentioned, right? That funding might be coming from 5 different countries.
I was just going to say, the more particularly European film you watch, the more you notice that what 40, 50 years ago there were some strong sort of national cinema feelings and productions, and almost everything now coming out of Europe is made as a co-production with 2 or 3 or 4 different countries often involved in the production, as well as, and a lot of times they're pulling from sort of deep pockets, places that have money, in order to fund films that in countries that maybe don't have so much. So
right. I mean, it's interesting that our curriculum, you know, universities, and not just at universities, but you see this in reviews and things all the time. I mean, we try and hold on to this national category, right? That somehow a Swedish film means something, right? That it's going to be dark and brooding, or I mean, I don't know what the associations might be. Of course, these don't always hold up. There's always lots of exceptions. So I guess one question would be: does the category European help us out, or is it just revamping the idea of national film all over again? I mean, on the one hand, it takes care of at least part of the issue of co-productions, right? That we have a lot of this funding works on the level of the European Union or states within Europe, but it doesn't take care of everything. In some ways, it's just kicking the can down the road, right? Or is there such a thing as European film? Is there something distinctive about that, do you think?
I don't know what Matt will say, but I don't know that it's not as clear to me as it may be in films that you would watch from the 50s and 60s, and even in the 70s, where it still looks, I mean, if you watch those older films, you can still see things that are fairly distinct. But now, film is really intertextual, and I don't want to drop that as just a catchword, but it really is. As I'm looking at that map, I'm thinking of the influence of Hollywood, which has been massive in the film industry, and the influence of now Bollywood in the film industry. And then there's art films that have always sort of had a small but strong and significant influence. And so someone making a movie now, and you can hear the director say things like this, someone making a movie now in Denmark is thinking, they're
that's right. You got to think past the domestic.
Yeah, market, and they're talking about their influences, and their influences are wide.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, Matt, do you want to lead us out with?
Well, I mean, Dan, maybe in that vein, I picked a film that would challenge that notion in particular, called The Missing Picture. But we'll do that.
We'll get to that here. Yeah, okay. So this is the first film here. Let's get a little bit out of the way here. Don't fall. I will not fall off.
So this is 1,001 grams, not to be confused with 21 grams, although they actually both talk about similar things in some ways. This is not nearly as weighty a film as that, although it's a very nice film. I don't know if it's one of the 10 best or something, but it's one I've been thinking a lot about since I saw it last fall at Toronto. And I doubt anyone in here has seen it. Maybe you have. It hasn't really it hasn't had wide distribution yet. It was Norway's entry for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, but it didn't get the nomination, so and didn't win, obviously. But it's won some other awards. But it's by a director named Bent Hamer. I like Bent Hammer, but regardless of the name, it's a pretty straightforward film in a lot of ways. You might know him from his 1995 movie Eggs. Anyone see Eggs? No, probably not.
The Kitchen Stories is the one that probably made it biggest
2010,
yeah.
So I'm just kidding. I didn't see Eggs either. No. It doesn't sound very interesting, but this one actually really is, and it's about the kilogram actually. And so I mean, I think a lot of this is based on fact, and you could have to corroborate with someone else, but that several countries, if not all countries in Europe, have their own kilogram by which they, it's a standard weight. And they keep it,
that is an actual literal
kilogram.
Yeah.
It's 90% plutonium and not plutonium, platinum. That would be a different kind of platinum and 10% iridium, right? And so they keep it in kind of a vault. And then there's a couple cases that go over it because you have to keep it clean, because if it gets dirty, it's obviously going to alter the weight of the kilogram. And then every year or so, there's a kind of conference in Paris, and they take the kilograms, each respective country, and they calibrate them against the kilogram, the one true kilogram in Paris, which in the film, you never really get a glimpse. I mean, you get a kind of fleeting glimpse of this. At one point, they open the vault, and we can kind of see the kilogram. But it's kind of like the Holy Grail. It just kind of passes before us, and then that's that's it. And so it's this sought after weight. And so what happens in the film is this woman who's a scientist of some sort. It's never quite clear, but her father is in charge of taking the kilogram every year, and he falls ill and dies, and she becomes responsible for taking the kilogram back and forth to Paris. You have to handle it very carefully. And there are a lot of really wonderful kind of comedic shots of her trying to get through airport security with this massive piece of metal in a special briefcase and everything. It looks like a bomb, And eventually they just kind of wave her through. They've been through the routine so many times. And, so it's kind of a light comedy. But there's some interesting philosophical issues as well. It's about her father who dies, and she's a kind of detached, emotional person. She's going through a divorce, and her husband continually is moving things out of the apartment piece by piece. And she begins a romance with a guy in Paris. And she's dealing with the death of her father at the same time. And they have this conversation about what the weight of his ashes will be when he dies, after he's cremated, right? And so there's this sense in which, he says there's the weight of the soul. And I'm not giving a lot away, because there isn't much. It's a pretty thin plot. There's not a lot of plot. It's mostly, it's a very sparse plot. But eventually it comes down to, they're weighing the ashes, and the weight changes. You can see that the soul has now left the ashes. But it's a very lovely little film, and just one worth your time. But there's a kind of weighty philosophical issue, I think, in here for postmodernists like myself, in that the idea of this calibration. We have the one true kilogram, but really that's an arbitrary kind of measure, and if that gets dirty, then that shifts as well. But it's the reference point for all these other kilograms, and how much a kilogram weighs affects us in a certain way too, right? Because it measures everything around it, and so there's this reference point that is unstable. At the same time, everyone's trying to match up with that point, and so. On one hand, it's a very light movie. On the other hand, I think there's some interesting issues that you could delve into philosophically with it as well. And
reminds me of the poem "Putting a Jar on the Hill in Tennessee," right? And the world that organizes itself around it. It's a similar kind of idea.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it sound unexciting. There is a point in which she's driving her little electric car, down this road, and somehow just veers off the road, right? And so then breaks the case, and then she's got to repair the case, and no one can find out that she's damaged the kilogram and gotten it dirty and everything. So there's some excitement in the film. There are some scenes of academics holding forth like we're doing now, and other academics sleeping, and so. But I'd encourage you to look for it.
Good. Yeah, Ben Hummer's he does interesting comments. Always very dry, very kind of underspoken, sorts of things. All right, Dennis. This is Dennis's first choice.
Have anyone seen this one, Force Majeure? So, somebody give me a rough translation of that title. What do you think? Force Majeure. It's almost a legalistic term, as I understand it. Kind of means an act of God. And we'll actually see the act of God here in just a minute. This is a photo of the act of God that takes place, if it works, assuming that the clip works.
It's interesting. The Swedish title is just tourist.
Yeah.
As if tourists are an act of God or something like that.
So Ruben Östlund, who actually made a career, is the director, actually made a career as a ski, like those. Who was the guy here in Utah who used to make all the ski movies? Warren Miller, yeah. Ruben Östlund kind of made a career as a ski movie maker before he became a feature film director. He's made a couple of films. But this is his biggest hit so far. It's really a cool film. I think you'll enjoy it. When did we show it? Have we showed this one yet?
I haven't showed it yet.
Okay, so we're showing this one in International Cinema in the fall, and you can come and see it then.
How would you categorize it? Is it a drama? Is it a comedy?
It's a drama, kind of a really dark, dry comedy. I found myself laughing because some of the scenes in it are so painfully embarrassing, and I don't even know how to say it. What we're going to see here, and this is the scene, this is sort of the key scene, is that there's an avalanche, and you can see it coming down the mountain. It's supposedly a controlled avalanche, but people don't behave the way that they're supposed to in this emergency situation. That's the nice way to put it. And Can we show the clip now,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
if it works? Maybe?
This is a family on ski vacation, right?
A Swedish family
right
in Switzerland on vacation. Thanks.
You're not supposed to be laughing
I know,
here,
I'm not
Dennis.
supposed to laugh.
So I had to leave one more line in the clip.
Okay.
That's the line.
That's the line.
Where's
all right.
Dad?
So my favorite line there is, it's okay, everything's fine, everything's fine. And what it turns out is that everything is not fine. In fact, nothing is fine from this point on in the film. And this little family, mom and dad and a little girl and little boy, are kind of traumatized by this event in some ways that are, again, kind of darkly humorous. So good film, thoughtful film, and a film that's really, Chip and I were talking about it a little bit this afternoon, a film that's really kind of about social mores, the superego, if you will, as well as maybe some deeper, philosophical questions about who's driving the bus, who's in charge of the world that we live in, and when things like this can happen sort of randomly.
Something that really jumped out to me about this film was the way that it interrogated some of our conceptions of manhood, which you don't see in cinema very often, right? That there's been a lot of investigation of of kind of women. I mean, we still have a long way to go, in kind of understanding gender roles and things like that. But some of the assumptions that we have about what a man is really interesting in this, because of course the father flees his family in this moment of crisis.
Did you notice
self-preservation?
Did you notice Dad
right?
leaving? Yeah.
That's he takes off, and then nothing can be the same afterwards. And it's kind of painful for me to watch as a father and things like that, thinking what would I do in a situation like this, and what if I was to abandon my family? Like how would that kind of change dynamics if I am not this image of what we think the strong provider should be? So I thought it was his films are always painful to watch, but there's always this kind of, like you said, this dark comedic side to it that you find yourself laughing sometimes at things that you wonder, wait a second, is this really funny, or do I have to laugh just to relieve kind of the embarrassing tension?
You'll enjoy this one.
He is able to save his iPhone and gloves. You'll notice,
He does, yeah.
Which his wife continually points out that you were able to collect your belongings before you.
Well,
you
it
ran
becomes
off.
an important piece of evidence at a certain point
Yes.
too.
So at dinner parties and things, she'll just. We were in an avalanche yesterday, and guess what my husband did? And, that's how they deal with it, is through these other people that get sucked in
In some super painfully public ways.
And Austin loves doing that. Some of his other films do that exact same thing, where it takes these kind of social conventions and kind of shows us how inhibiting they are in a lot of ways, and how they oppressive, even they can be. That we feel like we have to live up to certain unspoken conventions of the ways to to interact. So
We're going to run out of time.
yeah, we are. This is a great film. I think this is really good. So this is my first pick was the 2012 Amour. It's just they don't translate it as love. It always goes by Amour, by the Austrian filmmaker Michael Haneke. He's made a lot of really interesting, powerful, harrowing films lately, and I think Haneke is one of the really kind of great filmmakers at the peak of his career right now. This is a story again about a topic that you don't find represented too often, but love not in with the kind of the peak of beauty and of energy, but actually at the end of life, right? And this relationship between this old couple is they're facing the reality of their own mortality and sickness and how difficult that is. Haneke's films are never easy to watch. But they're the kind of films that when I've taught Haneke films with students before, they're the kind of films that you ask the students at the end of the semester, which ones did you like the most? It's not always a Haneke film that they're going to say was their favorite film. But if you say, okay, which film absolutely has to stay on the syllabus for the next time this class goes around, it's going to be the Haneke film. And this is, I think that this is no exceptions. Have you had a chance to, either of you, to see this film? It played the International Cinema, didn't it? Maybe it came out a few years ago before you came on. Highly recommend it. Okay, so back to Matt here.
So yeah, this is the missing picture. This is I think a film that I mentioned that challenges our idea of what a European film can be, because it's made by a Cambodian refugee who survived the Khmer Rouge genocide in the 70s and was able to flee to Thailand. And it was in a camp for a while there, and then ended up in France and went to school in France and became a director. But he carves all of these clay figures, and he makes just hundreds and hundreds of these figures. And so the whole film is, it's a beautiful film, documentary about his experience during the genocide. And so it's interspersed with archival footage from the period. But the whole point is that what really happened to the people is never filmed, right? You have the propaganda films from the Khmer Rouge, and then you have he's filling in all those gaps. And there's some interesting shots of him holding out, celluloid from other films of the period, but and then pre Khmer Rouge, because they destroyed everyone who was cultured, everyone who was educated, was sent to the camps or killed, or sent to the fields or killed. And so his father was educated and was a school teacher, and so he was sent to the field as well. And he talked about his father dying, and he carves these figures the whole time and sets them out into these elaborate little tableaux.
It's a really interesting way to do a documentary, right?
Yeah.
Something that fundamentally can't be shown, right?
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to find these kind of substitutes, just the archival footage or something like that, to kind of willfully embrace something that's very artificial, to get at that document. I think that's really interesting.
And it's very powerful too,
Yeah.
because you see him recreate, the trauma, eating rats and things like that. Just done in these little figures. But the narration, when I saw it on the DVD, it was in French. So it's the director himself speaking. And I don't know if on the Netflix streaming version it was in English. It was the only option, and it might be his voice as well. There, but I can't be sure. But the idea, it's filmed in France, made in France. Yeah. Some of the archival footage, of course, is from Cambodia. But is it a European film? It's a good question. Produced, I think in France, and obviously the French connection to Cambodia is extremely strong, and so because of the colonial era. So there's this idea of you could talk about film and colonization and reverse, perhaps, influence on France.
Well, I'm really glad you chose it too, because it's the only documentary in the group of films that we chose. And it's documentary is just it's a category of filmmaking that we tend to overlook. I think far more than we should, and a really interesting way to go about it as well. Okay, Dennis, you got number 5 here.
Ah, yes. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. It's a Turkish film. We're pushing the boundaries. Turkey, Europe, sure. Let's go for it.
As long as it's made on the right side of the Bosphorus, I think you're
good. All right, then we're good. Actually, it's not. but we're going for it anyway. I love this film in part because it's a police procedural, right? So it's not CSI, more like what's the one? Dum Dum. I can't remember. Law and Order. It's more like Law and Order, sort of, but it's very Turkish, and the problems. There's a murder. There's been a murder, but we can't find the bodies, and so the film is spent with these policemen and a sort of crook who's trying to make a deal, looking for the body of this murder victim, and it ends up being in some ways a very Turkish film because of the reasons that the murder has taken place, as well as the way that these people have dealt with this trauma, this tragedy. And so
when you say that it becomes a very Turkish film, do you mean in contrast to being a European film, or in contrast to being? I mean, there's something specifically national about it.
So I can when I show something from another country, or when I choose to portray something from another country as an artist, I can either choose to naturalize what I'm showing so that it looks like, even though it's Turkey, it sort of looks like France, or I can foreignize it. And some of the things in this film are very foreignized. They feel very different than what I'm used to when I watch a police film. At one point, everybody sits down and has tea together in the film because that's apparently what we do in Turkey. And it's, we're not going to stop being civilized just because you're a murderer and I'm not. And so there's a feeling, in some ways, there's a feeling of a foreignness to this film that's really delightful, despite the fact that it's a really nice police film, a nice whodunit, if you will.
Okay. All right, so next choice was, I have to admit, chosen more because of the complete body of work rather than the specific film, although I think the film is good. It's called In a Better World is the translation in English. Quite a bit different than the Danish, which is just revenge. And Susanne Bier is the director, Danish director. It's in Danish and Swedish and English. And it's basically, it's a drama taking place on two continents. The father is a doctor working for, volunteering with an organization, something like, Doctors Without Borders, and is in Africa while his son is undergoing some bullying and some other issues at school back in Denmark. And this is really typical of what several of Bier's films have done in the last decade or so. After the Wedding from, I think, 2006 is something similar. Brothers is an earlier film from 2000, I want to say 4, but I might be wrong on the date there, where all of these are family dramas that have some kind of global implication to it. The family is spread out somehow, and what's happening in the family is being affected by events outside in the world. And I think that this is a significant theme that runs through her work that's worth a lot more attention than it's gotten. And she continues to make really interesting films, and she's one of the few women directors that made our list. And although in looking at some of our other ones that we talked about but didn't quite make the 10 that we chose in the end, there certainly were women. And I think that the work of women directors is increasingly important, more so in Europe than in a lot of other places, because there's simply more opportunities that are afforded them in terms of access to funding and whatnot. So Susanne Bier, she makes both comedies as well as these dramas. They're kind of melodramatic a little bit, which I think is interesting to think about in terms of globalization, right? So the idea of melodrama is that you're trying to render in these absolute kind of black and white terms, kind of right and wrong, good and bad in an era of changing morality, and that's a really interesting enterprise when you're talking about globalization, because what's kind of moral and right in one context is not always when you start talking about its implications globally. And she's aware that she's kind of drawing on this genre of melodrama, which I think makes her really interesting stuff. Okay, Matt?
Well,
Number 7.
Melancholia. I hesitated to pick this film, but it's a film that I can't really ignore. it's a film that I admire more than I enjoy. I enjoy the first sequence. The opening sequence is one of the
Describes
most
a lot of Lars von
gorgeous
Trier,
things
actually.
on film ever. And then it just commences to lay waste to your soul. So if you're, and not in a good way, if if you're interested in that, then watch this film. There's a wedding scene, protracted wedding scene for about the first half of the movie. And if you want to push back your wedding plans about 5 to 10 years, watch that, and it'll do the trick. And then the second half of the movie, there's 2 parts, and then the second half of the movie is the end of the world. I'm not giving anything away because in the open sequence, you see this rogue planet Melancholia smash into Earth, right? And so everyone dies. And so there's this dread throughout the entire, the first half is just this extreme melancholia from this, the Kirsten Dunst character, Justine, I think is her name. And she just, suffers from such depression she can't even move her legs, and won't lock herself in her room during the wedding, and I mean everything just goes wrong from there. And then the second half is just they wait for this planet to collide into the Earth. So, regardless, it's still a remarkable achievement. It's a beautiful film and very well done, but it's extremely effective. And if you know anything about Lars von Trier, it's one of his tamer films, but it doesn't it doesn't have a tame effect on me anyway. The second time I watched it, I was able to keep a little bit of a critical distance and enjoyed it a lot more. But the first time I walked out in trouble. So
It describes several von Trier films that I've seen. He likes to provoke that way. And I remember the media conference at Cannes after this film came out, and where he just went completely off the rails and started talking about his Nazi uncle. And I mean, it went so far, his comments went so far. He just likes to provoke, a lot of times. And it went so far that he was declared a persona non grata for the festival.
He couldn't come within like 100 meters of the central complex.
And poor, Kirsten Dunst, she was sitting there in that news conference, and you could just watch her face as, von Trier is going deeper and deeper into, you can kind of sympathize, a little bit with those Nazis hunkered down in their bunker at the end of the war. And she's just kind of like, what does this have to do with the movie? What does this have to, why are you torpedoing this? But despite all of that, the film did very well at the festival. I mean, you kind of have to bracket off von Trier maybe to take his film sometimes. He likes to provoke. All right, Dennis.
Hey, so here we go.
Nod to Bob over here.
And this is another one where we're celebrating the filmmakers maybe more than this particular film. The Dardenne brothers, who are really, regardless of language or country of origin, they're 2 of the best filmmakers making films in the world today, I think. Really, really good. Frankly, I think their best film is The Promise. La Promesse, which is, it's just absolutely, in every way, it's a wonderful film. There's really no downside. The characters are great, but this one is comparable. It's a good film. It's a little boy, the kid with the bike. There you see him riding said bike, and he's had a rough deal. His parents are, mom I think is dead, and dad's a deadbeat, and he's in foster care and later in an orphanage. And he literally clings on to this woman that he meets in a doctor's office. And she eventually has some pity on him and takes him on as a foster parent. But it's in some ways sort of a devastating look at what happens when a child is abandoned by his parents, either by natural causes or by just bad parenting. But, and here's the good news, is that this one does not end with planets crashing into each other and the world being destroyed. It actually ends on what, for the Dardenne brothers, is a pretty positive note. Can we say that? It's almost a happy ending. I mean, it's as close as you're going to get to a happy ending, and you'll walk away from the theater thinking, hey, that's not so bad. The world maybe is a place that doesn't stink. and a really well-made film, too. You'll be moved.
All right, so the last film, the third film that I chose was Ida, that came out just this last year. This film spoke to me because, Well, visually, it was so stunning. I just, that caught my attention right away. Shot in black and white, with just a real eye to composition and to texture in the film.
But you almost won't notice that it's in black and white.
No, you kind of, there's such kind of variation in the contrast and what that it really, yeah, you don't notice it. I mean, I think that, the basic story is about this girl who's about to be, what's the word, not inducted, but she's about to take out her vows.
Yes.
And but before she does, the woman at the convent, the abbess, says that you need to go meet your relative, who I don't think, if I remember right, she didn't know even existed. And she comes to find out that, in fact, her family was Jewish and died during World War II. And then she goes with this relative who happens to be her aunt to find out more about the family and what happened to the family. And Ida hardly says a thing through the whole film. That you're left wondering what's going on inside this girl, and as she tries to process all of this. The film's about guilt. It's about forgiveness. It's about the trauma of the past and how we deal with this. And it's done in such a moving, bleak in some ways way that it really touched me. As I watched it, I was reminded of Bergman films. That there seemed to be something. There seems to be a kind of relationship there to some of those films from the 50s and 60s that had a similar kind of emotional austerity to it as it grappled with really difficult questions. But what strikes me, so we've talked about these 9 films. We'll hear about the audience's choice here in a second. They have spoken. The thing that strikes me that we started off by saying, well, is there such a thing as European film? And a lot of what we've chosen distinguishes itself. It deliberately distinguishes itself from Hollywood film. I mean, we talk about things like happy endings. There are actually plenty of European movies with happy endings.
We haven't chosen any of them.
We haven't chosen any of them. And why haven't we chosen any of them?
I think in some ways because I've seen that before.
This is something. That's exactly why I feel too.
This is something that you can't.
That's right. It's something that distinguishes itself from Hollywood, right? Yeah. And so maybe the category is more alive and well than we realize. I don't know. You can, as an audience, can kind of comment on this as well.
I'm not sure that it doesn't have a happy ending. It has a nice resolution at the end. It's everything that happens before then that's pretty nasty.
Yeah.
So.
And you know what? Even as you were describing it, I hadn't sort of pictured this as I was watching the film, but this is like sort of this more somber version of The Sound of Music. You watch it and tell me what you think. Seriously,
there is no singing or dancing.
No singing?
No singing or dancing.
Well, or dancing. Or
I'd like musicals more for all the song and dance.
That's right. Okay, so there was a tie in terms of the audience's choice for number 10. There was a tie, and the tie went to The Kid with a Bicycle.
Oh,
okay.
Hey, there you go.
Very good. So we anticipated that one, and then the Intouchables. Is that the way it's translated in English? Intouchables, right? Yeah. Is Intouchables. So another French film, which didn't make our list, but certainly one that created a lot of discussion when it first came out. Okay, so let's open it up for questions for this last 10 minutes. If you could step over here to the microphone to ask your question, because this is being recorded, and we'll go to about 10 to the hour. So do we have any volunteers who want to make it up there? You just kind of form a line over there by the map.
A queue.
A queue.
Thank you. Because we're here.
That's right.
Okay, so we all know about l'exception française. That makes it so that France has a lot of funding for movies. We know about the great Scandinavian, I don't know, kind of Norway's taken the torch a little bit from Sweden recently anyways, but it seems like these countries that you picked, I didn't see very many Spanish language films up there. I didn't see very...
There's a real reason for that. And I, as I was doing this, I went through and I tried to find two reasons, in fact. One of them is Boy, a lot of the films coming out of Spain right now are so violent that they sort of have ruled themselves out of what we can show, for instance, at International Cinema. They're not even rated R. A lot of them are rated NC-17 for both sex and violence, and violent sex. And so that's part of the problem. And it's really largely throughout and I'm not going to generalize too much, but it's pervasive in the Spanish film industry.
I've heard, and maybe you can comment on this, that part of this is a delayed reaction to Franco, right?
Could be.
That the kind of repressiveness of that has led to a, I mean, does that?
That's what I've heard.
Almost an immediate reaction. I mean, the minute Franco's out, then you get Almodovar making really excessive, very good, but very excessive films that we couldn't really even touch probably here. And the same thing with South Korea. I mean, after you get these dictatorships with censorship, then you see the film just, now we can do whatever we want, and they do. And they're making, both countries, Spain and Korea, are making very interesting movies. But I would hesitate to.
The other thing is that some of the best Spanish directors, and I'm thinking of someone like Guillermo del Toro, are making...
Who's Mexican?
Sorry, you're right. I got another one. Give me a minute.
Also Mexican.
So the best Spanish directors are Mexican. That's what we're
well, the three big ones, Iñárritu, Del Toro, and Cuarón are all from Mexico. Yeah.
In any case, I'm going to go ahead and use Del Toro, but we could use I'm going to say his name wrong. Almodovar.
Almodovar.
Thank you. They've really become a lot Hollywoodized, and so a lot of the films that they're making now are, well, I mean, Del Toro just made Pacific Rim. Thank you for that piece of cinematic wonder. But anyway, so that...
This has been a trend for a long time, though. I mean, you can go back to the silent era and this, Hollywood, kind of, hiring away, some of the biggest name directors from, from European countries that both creates crisis and becomes a source of national pride and, something, in between. It's, I mean, it's interesting that this continues on with some of the same kind of discourse, too, right? Did Lasse Hallström sell out when he left Sweden and went, started making Hollywood films, and they feel different, right? Because filmmaking is not it's not a one-person, kind of venture.
In Hollywood, the bottom line is always the bottom line.
Yeah. And so, with all that, is there, to repeat Professor Oscarson's question, is there something innately, about these films from these different countries that make them great films? If we're not coming up with films that we would consider great here at BYU or even elsewhere, what is it about France and Scandinavia? Is it cultural, political? What do you think?
That they're able to produce great films, you mean? Or, I mean, I think a film tradition is invaluable for making future films, right? I mean, it's always going to be a blessing and a curse for that next generation of filmmakers, but that you have those established pathways to get the films there. I mean, Ingmar Bergman did all of Scandinavia a huge favor in kind of creating this thing that became known as Swedish film. Now, it was a burden to other filmmakers who said, I'm not making Bergman films. I'm not doing it that way. But you better believe that they grabbed onto those coattails when in terms of distributors and all these kinds of things. So that makes a big difference to have a tradition to work from. But it's not, that doesn't determine it either. There's an Estonian film was nominated for best foreign language film this year, and it's not known for its great tradition, although it's a pretty good film.
And we weren't worried about coverage in terms of,
No.
we just picked 3 things a piece or a few that we were drawing from, not trying to represent every country. So.
But the film industry in some countries, and Spain isn't one of these, the film industry in some of the countries in Europe is more nascent. I mean, it's growing.
Well, and sometimes funding happens on a national level, too. I mean, that there is a way in which nationality still does matter, even if there's still a lot of co-production and stuff like that. But it has to have a certain amount of Swedishness to get Swedish funding, that kind of thing.
We didn't pick any British movies either, and they make fine films.
Well, I wanted to ask a question about European attitudes toward the reception of European films in this country. And the example I'm thinking about, I think there are others but the Italian film La Grande Bellezza, which won the Best Foreign Film 2 years ago, I think, right? And I remember reading that people, I mean, it's this beautiful film, but it does not paint a very, favorable picture of life in contemporary Rome. And there was actually this big debate that a lot of Italians were not happy with its success in the United States or more broadly because of that. And I just wonder how, when you do have the occasional film that becomes kind of a big deal in the United States or in Hollywood that has an influence, what kind of tensions or worries does that create, back in Europe when you have a certain film or even a director like Bergman who transcends a national cinema?
Yeah, that was precisely the problem with Bergman, is that people complain that, well, this doesn't represent Sweden. And Bergman's retort was, I didn't make a film about Sweden. I made a film that I wanted to make, kind of thing. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's the way we just categorize things based on the three things we know about Sweden, right? If we don't know a lot about it, Bergman, and so we essentialize from these representations that we have, So
any publicity is good publicity for most countries. It's just it becomes a burden when you're dealing with other filmmakers, I think, that don't want to be in that mode, or you have tourist boards or whatever that don't like the representation. I mean, ultimately it probably does them favors despite the complaint.
And a lot of it has to do with distribution companies and what like you say, marketing and what we want to get from Sweden is not what Sweden is necessarily producing.
It also may be part of the reason that a lot of those directors end up coming to other countries to make movies.
So I thought it was really interesting were you talking about the difference between a lot of the films you chosen and what we normally see in like a Hollywood setting, for example. But something I also thought was interesting was that at least 2 of those films have nominations for Academy Awards, and one of them actually just won. Mm-hmm. So do you think that that's a sign that Hollywood is changing and becoming more eclectic and that is involving that type of filmmaking, or do you think it's a sign that the Academy does not represent Hollywood?
No, you get 5 nominations or something, 5 or 6.
This is a big problem because they went through a few years ago. There was kind of an auditing of how many people had actually seen the foreign films they were voting for, and this is a big problem. Yeah, there's so many politics that go into what makes and it's a convenient. I mean, and I admit when I went down when we were preparing this, the first thing I did is what were the European films that were nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, which ones won, as a shorthand, because I know that got some kind of distribution here, and that would be a place to start talking. But the politics of who makes the cut to get a country's nomination, not to say anything of then who makes the cut, to make it to that final 5. I mean, most of the people haven't seen most of the films, and so it's any kind of festival, any kind of award, is political. Bottom line. It doesn't mean that it's not indicative of something. Some of these films that that won and that were nominated were really good films. But to say that it was really the best film that was not made in Hollywood that year, that's a tall order, and it has a lot more to do with a lot of other factors, politics and money and all this kind of thing, and luck. It happens to strike a chord at a certain time. That's that's true with a lot of films, not just foreign language films.
So when it comes to seeing these films, maybe some aren't going to be shown in the International Cinema, or maybe we're going to be out of town one weekend. What's the best way for a student or anyone in Utah Valley to pursue watching European films?
Go to the Cannes Film Festival, obviously.
Well, you do have to make an effort. I mean, the days of streaming have changed things, and Netflix discs and things like that. I mean, 2 of these films, Melancholia and another one. I had to go to the Broadway, in Salt Lake. I had to make a trip up there. They weren't going to play in Utah County, but
But what did I hear that someone's trying to open an art house theater in like an Oral?
I've heard the rumors.
I've heard the rumors. I don't know if you guys have been hearing this.
When it opens, let me know. And
we'll go.
It's a hard business to be in nowadays, though, because it's when we were students at BYU, those of us who were students at BYU, International Cinema was the only place to see some of these films. And that led to a different kind of dynamic. And nowadays, there's a lot of other ways to see them. And so, I mean, what I really appreciate that International Cinema has done is it's tried to, to find ways to, well, why is it still valuable to come to a theater and watch a film? And I think that it's helped capitalize on some of those reasons and how it kind of curates series and, with the lectures and, these kinds of things that make it itself an event that you can't get just by streaming. You guys have done a good job with that.
You could watch you could go home tonight with Netflix and watch Melancholia, The Missing Picture, Ida, and Force Majeure. Force Majeure is on Netflix as well. At least those four. And I kind of get frustrated as international cinema director when they are on Netflix, because I think if we show this, then no one's going to come. We don't have that special venue, even though I think you should go rather than watch it on your phone the way the director intended. So there's something different about going to the specialized viewing, temple, and watching
it. Seeing with an audience, I think that's
doing what we're doing right now. With your friends, or
instead of multitasking, having one window open with the film and playing Angry Birds and chatting with 3 people online, So it's a different experience, So.
All right. Well, thanks for coming tonight. It's been a fun conversation for us. We hope you've taken some part, and we'll be here for a few minutes too if you want to keep talking. Thank you.